Welcome to a new Daily Top AskReddit video. Today's topic.
If the military president suddenly ordered a mandatory draft for all men aged 18 to 42, how do you think millennials and GenZ would respond? It'd be pretty chaotic. Some people would push back right away, some would go along with it out of necessity, things would get messy. First of all, American companies would go insane. They'd lose a ton of their employees overnight, the ones not fired in favor of magical AI at least. Bureaucracy would grind to a halt. It took the DOD a few years to work out the kinks with Genesis at MEPs where you do medical and intake. And that was just for regular volunteers who were going to join anyways. Now imagine millions of records all needing waivers. The DOD would have to blanket approve waivers and just send people through to basic without an eval. They'd have no problem with that, since arguably throwing bodies into a grinder would be the goal. Dead men cast no votes. If that happens, doctors in the US would have the chance to do the funniest thing. Suddenly finding most men 18 to 42 have bone spurs, rolling on the floor laughing. Most men 18 to 42 are probably too overweight to serve in the military. The draft is just going to ensure that obesity rates rise and McDonald's has a record year, lol. They'd change the stats required to get around this, I bet. Millennials would be like suck my balls, in Cartman voice, with the megaphones. Red hats to the front of the line. I firmly stand on anyone supportive of any military intervention or action should be forced to serve on the front lines. IDC if it's Israel, Iran, Russia, Ukraine, Taiwan, China. If you are supportive of involvement and it happens off to the front lines you go. Don't make others fight for causes you believe in but aren't willing to go to battle in. With Rob Schneider leading the charge. Baron first. America has been able to maintain its empire abroad by minimizing the visibility and impact of its wars to the average person through the use of special forces and expensive air power that many other nations can't compete with. If an admin this historically unpopular tried to institute the draft, it would basically be asking for an overthrow of the US government. Yeah, I certainly am not going to report in for a draft. I'll dodge, dip, duck, dive, and dodge it with all might. Barring that, I'll start researching the ways that friendly fire is hazardous even in modern warfare amongst the commanding class. You can deny the draft. The options are draft or jail basically. It's also one of the reasons why the draft probably won't come back. You need a popular war with a popular admin or everyone just picks jail. Well, they did want to take the US back to the 50s. They should expect the reactions of the 60s. Massive protests mixed with a ton of draft dodging on conscientious objectors. The number of Quakers and the like will probably increase for religious objections. Vietnam had the government work hard to manufacture consent. Trump and his ilk are relying solely on the MAGA faithful, many of whom are starting to waver. Yeah, in Vietnam there was a solid column of people who could, however erroneously, understand the justification and faithfully trusted the power structure. This time around, when asking for this kind of sacrifice, most don't trust Trump, even his followers. As for GenZ, do you want a Fox newscaster who hit himself in the nuts with a skateboard on live TV who has an alcohol problem and a messy relationship history, which includes a letter from his own mother about what a trash person he is, as the man leading your sons into war? Pattern he is not. It's all bluster when it's theoretical, but start forcing young men to go to a war nobody wants right now and send them back dead, it's political suicide. At some point the volume of people who will not comply will become ungovernable, and you'll have a difficult time with soft non-compliance, and forcing folks to comply will turn the military police into an even more hated version of ICE. It could potentially collapse the military power structure. It only works when those within consent to be governed. That would be a very dangerous game, but I put nothing past this regime for all-out stupidity. I doubt the US government or many governments at all will instate drafts unless current modern war changes drastically. Mass-scale drafts like Vietnam have proven that modern-day drafts don't work. It leads to instability, draft dodging, and worst of all, sabotage. Sabotage so severe governments have decided to have a volunteer-only militaries. Oh no, my bone spurs. Quote, there's gonna be a massive uptick in TikTok Zoomer manosphere Republicans, the very #1 most obnoxious form of Republican next to the 60-year-old red-faced puffers who are suddenly okay with identifying as trans. It takes Congress to do this. The entire House of Representatives is running for re-election in November. There is not a chance of a draft unless the continental US is attacked. It should take Congress to do this, but actually all it takes is no one with enough power willing to stop it. It should take Congress to do many of the things that have already been done, and yet here we are. My biggest disappointment in Obama was that he did not work to restore the constitutional balance of power and limit the executive branch. It was one of his campaign promises. It's not that I trusted him to do it, but he was also the only one even bringing it up as a potential problem. Plus there's a mandatory 6-month period between enactment of the law, which would never pass anyway except in some "we're all fucked anyway" scenario, and the first draft happening. Yeah, and that alone would give people a huge window to react legally, politically, and personally. You probably see court challenges, protests, people trying to secure exemptions. Some would even make major life decisions just to avoid it. It wouldn't be something that just quietly kicks in overnight. The build-up would be just as chaotic as the draft itself. Sit on my lawn with my shotgun. If I'm going to war, the battle will start right here. I'm not fighting for anything but my home and my life, not some billionaire's offshore assets. Right, if you're gonna die in a war anyways, you might as well die fighting your oppressors instead of who your oppressors want you to fight. 'Tis better to die 'neath an American sky than at Tehran or Kermanshah. It would probably be similar to the 60s and 70s. Lots of compliance and dead kids. FYI, Vietnam at its lowest was more popular than this war. Just throwing that out there. You forgot the mutinies, fragging of officers, and Project 100,000 Inches, where the Pentagon took otherwise unqualified draftees and sent them to the front lines anyway with 3x the casualty rate. Are you referring to Myanmar's morons? Holy shit, how have I never heard of this? I owe my country nothing. I'm not going to war for the benefit of a bunch of rich suits who would never do the same for us purely because of the piece of land I happen to be born on. If I got seriously sick, this country would let me lose everything I've worked for and die in the street, despite having paid thousands into public and private healthcare my entire adult life. Why would I fight an offensive war for it? As a 30-year-old man, let me tell ya, my asthma just got worse. I'd also stop working out vigorously and get really fucking fat. How are your bone spurs doing? ? They're not so great, and I think that I've also caught both the transgender ideology and have fallen pregnant. Fragging, that's what would happen. And who the fuck is going to accept being drafted into an illegal war by a draft-dodging, demented child rapist? It won't be like the last draft. It will be chaos, rebellion, and a huge fight against our government, possibly a full revolution tbh. I read a post from someone who got out that if they were called back to service to go to Iran, and someone in their command ends up talking about the end times or how their blood is needed for rapture to begin, they'd probably start fragging people real quick. Ain't no way anyone is gonna die just because some ends time cultist is willing to send their own people to their deaths. If some nut job is telling you to kill people that didn't do shit to you, and that person is also leading you into situations that could get you killed, it's not surprising. Fragging was a huge problem in Vietnam along with other forms of sabotage. This war is even more unpopular than Vietnam. A draft would just help Iran by putting a whole bunch of saboteurs on the US side. Considering a lot of us know what fragging is, it'd get ugly pretty quick. Some of us know more than just what fragging is. Some of us are actually willing to frag, especially those of us that are former active duty enlisted that already served their time. There's speculation sailors have already been sabotaging their ships on deployment. Then again, it could just be logistical incompetence since the current admin seems to act like logistics is a waste of money. 30 frags wins the match, right? They'd be a long queue to get into Canada and Mexico. Mexico might build a wall. It would be deeply ironic for Mexico to actually pay for and build a wall like Trump said they would, but to keep Americans out of. Trump was playing a long game of 5D chess just to deliver on that one campaign promise. I ain't going anywhere for that dickhead, and I ain't going to prison. Try and make me. Yep, I'm no tough guy, but I'm sure as shit not dying in a desert for Israel and a bunch of white Christian nationalists. So, sit at home in your parents' house underemployed and struggling to pay bills, or sit in a minimum security prison with 3 hots and a cot, while someone else pays your bills. Remember when Bondi said if they prosecute everyone on the Epstein files, the system would collapse? Well, this is basically that times 1,000. They would never succeed in prosecuting everyone in non-compliance. The first thing that should happen is an avalanche of lawsuits regarding the sex discrimination of only including men in the draft. Also, constitutionally in the US, the military president have no authority to call for a unilateral draft. Congress decides that, so there would be a legal issue too. A silly thing like the Constitution has never stopped him before. Historically, the Supreme Court held that as legal as the draft's purpose was to obtain combat troops and women weren't allowed to serve in combat. But, now they are. So I could see a challenge winning under a balanced Supreme Court. Unfortunately with this one I doubt it. Pete Hegseth has said over and over that he doesn't want women in combat roles because it makes his War Department less lethal. The government has made the position very clear that they don't think women are equal, and I would be afraid that an equal rights lawsuit over the draft in this political climate would end with women losing more rights rather than being affirmed as equal. Personally, I think all genders having the right to fragging serve their country. I'd love to sabotage expensive equipment be a helicopter pilot. Most of them are probably unfit for service anyway, so it may be a moot point. You highly underestimate the current administration's willingness to move the goalposts for just about anything. Exactly, look what they did with ICE. I had an extended family member join in the early 2010s and his training was intense. He was so professionally insulted by how far they lowered the standards that he actually transferred out of DHS when he saw what they started letting through. I'm so curious as to what he thinks of this, but we don't talk much for obvious reasons, lol. This is my favorite part about people freaking out about this scenario out on Reddit. The military doesn't want 300 pounds people with type 2 diabetes and several mental disorders. Y'all are fine. Much like Minamara's morons, I struggle to believe the standards won't be changed to fit the needs during times of combat. Man, they just raised the age to join to 42, they just don't want the 300 lbers yet. Tears of joy. Yay, can you imagine them having to alter the already altered, have you smoked weed? That used to disqualify until they got desperate, but then they would take the answer of once or twice. That's not gonna work with states wilt legal MJ. You might want to look up Minamara's morons. It was a project to get 100k fresh conscripts sent to Vietnam, and boy, did they relax the standards. Ended up getting a lot of people killed because, guess what, when you put someone who is physically, mentally unfit for combat, they tend to get killed pretty quick. IRC, that's how Forrest Gump ended up in Vietnam, because of those relaxed standards. Obviously that's a fictional story, but it's interesting that there was real-life reasons someone like him would be in the army.